Welcome to Inside the Corner Office, a podcast where you will be taken behind the scenes of the daily life of a CEO. I'm Thomas Buberl, CEO of AXA. In each episode of this podcast, we will delve into a specific aspect of this role. You will see that making decisions from an office is definitely not what this job is all about. For every topic, we'll be joined by a leader of a major organization. I hope you will enjoy these discussions. Tune in and take a seat at the table. We are inside the Corner Office. Welcome back to Inside the Corner Office. In this episode, I'm joined by Max Hollein, Director and CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to explore what leadership looks like when you run an institution built on meaning, not profit. With more than 2 decades of leadership across Europe and the US, he combines deep artistic experience with strong business discipline. Together, we'll discuss how artistic vision, financial sustainability, and public trust come together at the highest level of responsibility. It's good to see you, Max. Welcome.
Very good to see you too. Thank you.
Do you remember when we first met?
Well, I certainly remember that we met here in this office, here at the Metropolitan Museum, some time ago, where we talked about the museum, insurance, and all the questions that also come with it. But I think we must have met already before, since we both worked in Germany. Me back then as the director of the Städel Museum at the Schönen Kunsthalle, you with AXA there. So I'm sure that we've been around. And it's great to see you here. And thank you for inviting me to this podcast.
Thank you very much. And we talk about all aspects of leadership of a museum. And maybe let's start with my impression when I just came in, because when you come in, you have to go partially to the museum. And what's quite interesting is that you still see a lot of different nations, a lot of people of different background. How is this in the current situation where we have more isolation, more nationalism? What role does art play or not play in this new setting?
Well, I think in principle, art and art institutions are for sure great conveners. I think that they not only bring communities together, but they are also there for you as an individual as well as a group to find that connection, to feel that that's also your home. Sometimes your home away from home if you are a community living here that comes from abroad. So I'd say the sheer idea of the Universal Museum or the encyclopedic institution, and the Met is certainly probably one of the premier examples of that, is to bring the cultures of the world together in one place and put them not only into dialogue, but actually really make understand that we have a deeply joined cultural heritage. And I think that's what this museum celebrates. It celebrates art, it celebrates connectivity, it celebrates in that sense also history. And that gets a response. It gets a response from New Yorkers, which are also, as you know, a very diverse group of people and many different nations in that sense are represented in New York. But of course, we are also have an institution here in New York City that's a premier touristic destination. But we clearly see changes in perception. And I think that in a time of increasing nationalism that you have in various different areas of the world, where basically countries ideally would like to have culture define their nation. And sometimes that border is being drawn more recently than how these cultures have developed. So often the nation itself has less to do with the culture. I think it's this museum that stands at the opposite end of nationalism. We are kind of, so to say, the anti-idea of that almost like momentum. And that's, I think, a very important role in our current time and an important role about the understanding of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the leadership of a museum, because, many of our listeners know how a company is being managed, but a museum is something different and special. So, how could you explain what leadership in a museum looks like? What are the 3-4 things that are important to be a good leader in a museum?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to realize we are a mission-driven institution. We are a non-profit organization. I would say our premier target has to be relevancy. We have to be relevant for our audiences and for what we represent. So that's obviously a metric that's not very calculable, and it's different to an EBITDA or anything else that you might have. But it basically means that you need to make sure that as a leader, you provide first and foremost a programmatic vision for, let's say, the museum to move forward and to have an anchor or North Star, but honestly also for the financial sustainability of the institution, because we basically live off, first and foremost, three pillars. One is, yes, our ticket revenue. It's about a third of what we have. Then our endowment, which currently is at $5.5 billion. So that for our operating budget, because some of it is restricted for other causes, creates about a third of what we need every year for our operating budget. But then a big part annually is really gifts, people donating money. And they do that because they believe in our mission. They believe in what we do is relevant right now. So let's say if we would lose that, if people wouldn't care anymore, it would not only mean less visitors, but it actually would mean that people almost like lose interest or trust in a museum as an important civic institution. And so in that sense, that's for me is the premier goal also of leadership, and to give that direction and give the ability then for the institution to follow and execute. Obviously, there are multiple layers how you do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's go a little bit more in detail. So, let's start with that third dimension. You get donations, you get money, and often when people give you money, they also associate maybe a little influence in what should happen with the money. How do you manage contradictions sometimes that, yes, you need the money, you want to accept it to fulfill the mission, but it's not up to the donor to tell you what you need to do?
So I'd say every major donor has an agenda. I appreciate that. I actually encourage that. It helps actually to raise the funds. So if you are a totally enthusiastic Greek and Roman collector, you would want to give money for our Greek and Roman galleries. If you are someone who is totally immersed in K-12 education, you want to give money to the museum so that we expand our offerings in that area. If you believe in the museum as being a premier place for foreigners to be educated about the United States, you probably give money for that. So you have all these different donors with all these different agendas. You generate, so to say, your independence by creating this orchestra of donors who basically all have their individual agendas, but the overarching idea of the museum needs to kind of bring all of them together. So it allows us to basically have a multitude of donors with different areas of interest, and then you bring that together, and as a whole, it creates this very holistic, very timely, and very contemporary institution. There would be almost like an improper influence by a donor if there would be only one or two, because then the institution would be kind of going only in that direction or only caring about that. But since we are in a good place, I would say, by having probably every year at least 500 major donors with major gifts, you as the director almost like conduct this orchestra so that the overall symphony really sounds in the way it should be.
Which is not always easy.
No.
In companies, we often talk about that a company is in constant change, constant transformation, certainly in the age of AI. How do we have to imagine constant change and transformation in a museum?
In principle, I'd say museums are conservative by nature, in the sense that for many, they have the purpose of conserving art and conserving culture. So you could have an impression that, okay, museums are dusty institutions that don't change at all. I would say the opposite is true, but they are, of course, complex organisms. We have 2 million objects. We have 2,000 people working here. We have extraordinary specialists in very special areas. And so in order for this institution to further evolve, you need to make sure that you really are able to use the newest scholarship in changing your stories, your narratives, what you want to show, how you want to show it, how you want to have this understood, but also by absorbing the newest technologies to operate in a sound environment. Use the ability to disseminate also your information in various ways way beyond the physical perimeter of the institution. All of these aspects. So I think that this museum is actually an ever-evolving organism, and you can use different numbers for that. But for example, currently we are investing about $1.4 billion for just changing, not physically expanding, just changing about a quarter of our existing galleries. Just updating them, creating a better environment, all of that. And so that kind of shows you that while our physical perimeter is fixed, we cannot move one more inch into Central Park, within the institution there's still enormous change, evolution, and being part of the discourses of our time. Yeah.
How does this happen? I mean, in a company, you have a strategy, you have a financial plan, which you have as well. But, are these changes planned? Do they happen over many, many years? When you come into a museum, you only see the exhibition. You never see what's going on behind the scenes. So this life behind the scenes, what are the 2-3 things where you say, look, this is important to remember?
So before I answer that question, I think that it's important to realize what you see as a visitor of a museum is only one small part of it. And I'm not meaning that, okay, yes, we have offices, how to run it. We actually also do a lot of work as a museum that you don't experience as a visitor. We run excavation sites around the world. We run educational efforts across New York City and the tri-state area. We are the main provider of expertise in many different other areas of the world. We train American GIs when they go on cultural rescue missions, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to see this museum not only as a place where you visit wonderful galleries and outstanding works of art, but where it's really a cultural institution that provides service and is mission-driven beyond that. And so in a certain way, you need to set priorities as an institution. Where do we want to do more? Where do we want to invest more? Where are areas where we need to both grow as well as be more alert to the changes that have happened, meaning changes in scholarship, how you look at certain areas of cultures that we represent, or opportunities, how we can grow our collection in a meaningful way. And all of these can then create priorities, which are more like maybe like in big companies, like major development projects. And that you can then quantify in regard to how much effort it would take, what it would do to sometimes also to your physical premises, as well as what would be a timing and a budget for that. And then you have, of course, competing larger scale initiatives, capital projects, that basically need to be, they get tested, they need to be defended, they need to be decided on. So certainly it comes out of the institution. The director and CEO is, of course, someone who needs to lead that. But of course, we have a board of trustees that not only executes oversight, but is more often involved in these projects also as major donors. So it goes through a multi-layered process of vetting and also of finding the level of support and sometimes even the camaraderie that it needs. But we have audit committees, we have finance committees, we have development committees, all of that, all these things that you also know from,
like a normal
from
company,
the corporate
exactly.
world. Yeah.
When you look as like a leader of a museum, what are the 2-3 things that he or she needs to have to be a successful leader of a museum?
I'm a strong believer that all really starts with the art. There might be other museum leaders, don't see it that way, but I think you have to have a deep passion for the arts, and you also need to understand art and be part of that community. I think that's the only way how you can be an authentic leader. And while you, in that way, speak different languages, yes, I can speak with business people in a different way than I speak with art historians or artists. But I think that the whole idea really starts with the art. And so that for me is the integrity of that is really important. And then you have here a mid-size operation. We have 2,000 people working here, where, again, probably similar with some corporate entities in that way, there is a group of people here that are curators, and we have 140 of them, who are extraordinary specialists. They are outstanding intellectual heads. You have to They are, so to say, the content providers. And you need to be able to manage these highly intellectual, fairly idiosyncratic personalities in a way that they feel encouraged and they feel be empowered. But on the other hand, you need to manage them so that they can still fit into your system. Yeah? And so that's one of the challenges that you have, and great opportunities, of course, as well, in any museum. And that's important for that. And then finally, I think you have to realize as a leader of a museum that a museum has a problem in its DNA, which makes sustainability of the institution challenging. And what I mean with that is that a museum, to really fulfill its mission, it needs to continue to collect. So basically, it's an ever-growing organism. So the more art we bring in, the more work we have with it, the more our operational costs expand, right? That's different to other areas of culture. Like an opera house doesn't need to triple or quadruple to fulfill its mission. A theater doesn't need to do that. A museum, if you look at the Met, is a little bit over 150 years old. It started with a small building, and now we are 2 million square feet. And it will continue one way or the other to grow. If you can't grow physically anymore, we grow digitally. And so this growth gene that we have in our institution, that's something that you have to really carefully manage, not only to project towards the future, but also to make sure that you create an environment financially, but also in regard to our overall structure, how that growth can be absorbed.
You just mentioned digital growth. What is the digital dimension of a museum, and how do you also impregnate this as a leader?
So obviously we have websites that are very successful, 35 million visitors a year on our website. We run a whole series of different social media channels in different areas of the world. We are, of course, in China, very involved in all different areas of social media channels, different ones here. So that's a very important piece, not only to provide information, but to really kind of be accessible. And that runs the whole gamut from pure information to we run the biggest website on history of art, really deep and multi-layered, online educational courses, etc. But besides that, we are also deeply involved in advancing technology. First and foremost these days, especially in 3D imaging. We have our own 3D imaging department, and I think we are on the forefront of that. You see some of it already on our website. We work together with all the major companies in the world because they're, of course, very interested in that. 3D imaging for us is, of course, super interesting because it really allows you to see, have a holistic view of an artwork on a digital platform. And then, of course, like everyone else, we use AI and start to incorporate AI in various ways. I think for us it means really a significant new tool for some of our scholarly endeavors, certainly also in our whole security and safety operations. And what was maybe like 10 years ago still an enormous hurdle for us in regard to some of the content that we provide, meaning, so it's in English, but if you want to have various translations, it's a major financial investment. So that kind of evaporates right now. Not only is AI already translating everything, but probably in the future you will not even notice in which language something was originally written. It gets automatically translated into whatever you feel most comfortable in. There are multiple ways how we can incorporate that, or how we are already benefiting from it, but also how we are being challenged. One question that I always get asked is this undermining the idea of visiting the museum. And we see no evidence of that. And so this kind of death of the museum was already predicted when we started to be able to print color in catalogs, right? And then when television started, or then when the internet came, and now with AI. It's fascinating to see that basically our audience numbers keep growing, our visitor numbers keep growing, and that I think is important. The average stay of our visitor stayed the same ever since the 1960s, which is when we started to measure it. At the Met, it's 2 hours and 43 minutes. So basically, that hasn't changed much, right? So it means despite us living in a time of limited attention span and very different viewing patterns that you have in all different other areas, a museum visit is still this completely different way of how you see something, how you absorb information, how you are together in an experience.
Talking about your visitors, and you said you're very passionate about art. You're also very passionate to understand, what the visitor is experiencing. How do you experience those customer demands? I mean, you look at the duration of the visit. Do you also look where they go, which paths they take? What is important when you think about needs of your customers?
So we track our visitors very carefully, so nobody should not feel totally observed, but we continuously check on the different almost like patterns as well as the emotional experiences of a visit. I could show you charts of different almost like types of visitors and how we measure not only how long they stay, what they look at, where they feel happy and where it's kind of a depressing moment at the museum, etc. So that's all being very carefully measured. We also measure where you come from, what your educational level is, what your financial background is, etc., etc. This will be done through surveys, and which allows us to really look at, are we achieving our goals? Have we diversified our audiences? Do we reach enough of a spectrum of audiences? Are we accessible to people, and from where? Have we kind of avoided, or have we taking away certain hurdles that basically were in existence in before? All of that, I think, is important for us. It's important also for the existence of the Met, because at the end of the day, the Met is one of the greatest museums in the world. Our trustees would say the greatest. And
you as well.
And it's not a national gallery. We are not the National Gallery of the United States. We are a major museum in New York City, but we are really a museum of the world and for the world.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we are that welcoming and almost like also this disseminating institution for as many people as possible.
As a leader, growing and learning is very important. You have started with a very good pedigree, coming out of an artistic family, being educated in art, but also being educated in business through an MBA. So how do you learn on your job?
Well, I think that it's one of the great privileges in working in museums. You learn constantly. To tell you a secret, one thing that a museum director has to do constantly is you have to pretend as if you're knowledgeable of all the art that you have under your custody. Obviously, it's an impossibility.
We won't do the test later.
Yeah, right. I'm not a specialist on every of our different areas, yeah, although everybody kind of almost like expects me to be. So that's a continuous learning, right? Not only when I travel, also with our curators. I've just been recently to Yogyakarta in Indonesia, and I've been to various areas in India where we have major projects. These are learning experiences, but you not only learn about art, you learn about culture, you honestly also learn about politics, yeah? And you must not underestimate the role that this museum plays in sometimes even geopolitical environments. So when we see the tensions further rising, let's say, between the US and other countries, although we are a private foundation, but we are this kind of place where still people meet, yeah, and come together. So when I was most recently with some of our trustees in Shanghai, in the midst of the US-China tariff war, if you want to call it that way, we were greeted almost like as if we are the ambassadors of friendship, yeah. And so in a certain way, it showed there was a longing for gestures of friendship and collaboration. And so in that way, we provide that. And I think that's also well respected and positively seen on all sides. These are the cultural bridges that we sustain and that are so important and more important than ever these days.
Certainly now in this context. Do you also, as a CEO, we exchange a lot with other CEOs to learn from each other. Does the same exist in the museum sphere? Do you exchange with your colleagues in different countries to, exchange experience, learn from each other?
Yes, there's a very close-knit group of museum leaders of different countries, which are based on their respective setups. Some of their problems are very different than ours, but we all kind of are in the same area. So that's also a fantastic way of learning and actually also getting inspired by others. So that's not only does exist, but one of our main activities is to do special exhibitions, right? I just came from our installation of the major Raphael show that we are putting forward. It's an exhibition of over 220 works, and it has loans from over 100 institutions. So we are constantly actually in touch with our peers, saying, okay, can you please lend us this or that work for 3 months? And oh yes, of course, we're going to lend you then this or that. So we are not really competitors. We are like friendly institutions supporting each other in some of these. Sometimes you compete maybe for the same donor or something in certain areas, but otherwise it's actually a network of support. I also, of course, in very close touch with a whole number of CEOs of companies and corporations, and not only because some of them are on our board, but also because I think that's a very important part of not only being a member of a social and cultural fabric here in New York City and beyond, but also, I mean, it's fascinating for us and really important to learn about, I spent 2 years in San Francisco about some of the technology companies and how we are able to be part of that. And of course, they are also quite involved here. I mean, Instagram is a major sponsor of ours and many other of these companies.
When we spoke about the setup of the museum, and as a European, I was waiting for that. You didn't mention any Ministry of Education that is, influencing you. So it's when you look at the difference of a museum in the US that is very much privately funded. Yes, I'm sure you have lots of relationship with the city of New York, the mayor of New York. But in Europe, it's, art is very much linked to politics. Art in some countries like France is also used as a political vector. If you think about the differences between the US and Europe, what comes to your mind, and obviously which system do you prefer?
I would say there are two major differences between American and European institutions. I'm not generalizing. One is, yes, the funding. Our funding comes really to a highest percentage from private sources. So in that sense, we are independent from public money. Although we are also a city institution in the sense we sit on city ground and we also get support from the city, but it's in general we are privately funded. That's very different to European institutions. So in a sense, our dependence on political changes or a ministry or even a change where a certain, president wants to go or not, that doesn't have a direct aspect because, again, we are not directly linked to that. So it's the funding that's a different, but also there's a big difference. Almost all American institutions were founded as museums. So the first goal of its founding was usually an educational mission. Some European museums actually didn't start as museums. They started out of a princely collection or some other aristocratic or religious collecting entity. It wasn't immediately meant as a public entity. So in a certain way, American museums, more than European institutions, have in their almost like original charter that they have to serve the public, and that the public also almost like expects the museum to represent its values. And that is kind of different than some of the old established European institutions that come out of Rudolf II's collection in Prague or whatsoever. And I'm saying that because, again, also you see that with it comes a certain level of independence, because it's for the public and not for a ruler.
Very good. We unfortunately have to come to the end of a very interesting discussion with you around museums and its challenges. A lot of the listeners that we have today are people that work in companies that aspire to become CEOs. What is your recommendation or piece of advice to them, both on the leadership side, but also on the art side? How can art bring them forward in their life?
I'd say on the leadership side, I really feel you want to lead with integrity, and you need to lead first and foremost. That gets me back to what we discussed before, in a truly authentic way, and there has to be some kind of passion in you why you're doing it, for whatever reason, whatever your compass is, and that needs to be readable so that people understand. I think art, I would use art as a symbol maybe for anyone. Art allows you to maintain curiosity and to always understand that you have not seen it all, you don't know it all, and there's so much more that you can experience. And I love this wonderland of art that can challenge you, that can excite you, that can be just beautiful to look at or be completely terrifying. I think you want to put yourself into these unknown territories and sometimes unexperienced environments. I think that makes you a continuously also authentic leader.
A wonderful conclusion. Thank you, Max, for this very inspiring discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.